Welcome to Dowsers.com. I'm Joey Korn, and my work is about dowsing, about personal energy clearing and space clearing, and about spiritual matters. I have a page on my father's story, which you have just arrived at, in my website, but it's much neglected in my website because it just doesn't fit the theme of my website. But it's probably one of the most important parts of my website. Dad was a Holocaust survivor. He spent 5.5 years in Nazi ghettos and concentration camps. His whole family, his parents and his two little sisters, were murdered by the Nazis. He lost probably the great majority of his extended family. He lived through torture, through deprivation, through starvation, cruelty in unimaginable ways. But his story is amazing. It's an incredible story about an incredible man, my hero. And what I'd like to do today is just read you a few excerpts from my father's story. And I'm going to begin with the introduction or the dedication. I dedicate this book to my wife, Ellie, who inspired me through the years to succeed in all my understandings. I also dedicate this book to the memory of Mr. J.Y. Platt. I came to America as a displaced person. I wanted to succeed in life through my own individual efforts and not from the charity of others. Mr. Platt gave me that opportunity to do just that. I wrote this book because I am proud to be an American. I want to show my own children and whoever reads this book why I feel so grateful to be a part of this great country, the United States of America. You know, I think that's an important thing. We do live in the best country in the world. The dad came here because America to him meant freedom. And I just feel that we're losing a lot of those freedoms today. Yes, we have the freedom of religion, but do we really have the freedom of expression? Do we really have the freedom to speak freely about what's going on in our government with our government leaders? I don't care what party it is, who's in charge at the time. Do we have freedom to say what we want in life? Especially, it's just, I just feel like we're losing a lot of the freedoms that we were built on, this country was built on. And we'll get them back. I know it's coming. We got to go through the difficult times to get to the much better times. And but now I'd like to read a little bit more in my father's story. He was, I guess, about a year into after the Nazis took over and took my father's family home and their family business away from them, a small lumber yard that Dad would have been the third generation owner of had he lived there, have he been able to live there that long, survive there that long. And they were in their first ghetto. They had been there for about a year. And a ghetto is a terrible place. They would put the Jews and other persecuted groups in like the worst part of town in an area, and they'd have to live there in squalor. And it got so bad that fleas had infested the ghetto, all the inhabitants of the ghetto. With fleas came a disease called typhus. They weren't given any medication, just penicillin would have taken care of it. But Dad was seeing his friends and others dying every day. And he thought, if I don't get out of here, I'm not going to be able to survive myself. I'm going to die and my family's going to die. Maybe if I can escape, I can help my family from outside the ghetto, and I can maybe help them survive this terrible thing that we're in. And who knows what would happen. But the toughest part about escaping was not the risk that he was taking. It was sharing with his parents and his little sisters that he was leaving. I'd like to read you leaving them. And this is this chapter is called Our Final Farewell. Now, Dad's about 17 years old now. When the war started, he was 16. So the courage he had and the courage that his family had is just almost, it's hard to understand. Even more trying than facing death itself was facing my parents and sisters with the news that I was planning to escape. I shall never forget my mother sobbing and saying to me, "Son mine, listen to me. Do you think that you are any different or better than us? Don't act in this selfish way. You should want to stay with your family and share the same fate with us. What will befall us will befall you too. What us will, with God's will befall you too. Don't be selfish. Don't desert your family." My mother convinced almost everyone that she was right, even me. My father had the courage to think differently and logically. After reflecting on the problem that confronted us all, he said, "Do you want Abe to stay here and die, God forbid, with us? Or would you rather he escape and live and possibly help us later to escape also?" My father's wisdom prevailed and convinced us all that escape was the right thing to do. Now my family stared into empty space with me, waiting for the 0 hour when I was to attempt my escape. My father was calm and collected, despite the tension that gripped us all. "Don't forget to remove your Jewish star insignia from your coat," he said. "Even though they displayed our revered Star of David, these yellow badges of shame identified us easily to any German, even from a distance, as Jews to be abused." My heart broke as the moment of departure and separation from my family neared. I ran to meet the outstretched arms of my mother. Her frail, weakened form convulsed with sobs as she embraced me and kissed me goodbye. She held on to me with a grip that expressed volumes. It said, "Go." It said, "Stay." It said, "How sad." It said, "How much I love you, now and forever." It said, "God, please watch over my son." It said the unspeakable. It spoke of a mother's love for her son, for her only son. My sisters cried and held on to me as if to hold on to the memory of this moment and to life. My father, who had always been my strength and my shield, waited until last to come over. He had a rugged face with a simple, short mustache and a head of premature gray, born of pain. He removed his pinched spectacles, fell on my shoulder, hugged me with all of his might, and then abruptly let go. "Don't ever forget us," he said. "Don't forget who you are and what our religion teaches us. Watch yourself, and may the Eternal, who watches over all of us, mercifully protect you." I had to summon all my strength to make my feet take me away. I was never to see my family again. Okay, now we're going to skip through all the horrors that Dad really didn't focus on that he experienced. He touched on them. He mainly focused on the good again. On the good. He focused on the good in people, but he also saw the other side. He saw starved Jews and starved other prisoners that would steal from their own family, their own children. We're talking bread here, the bare necessities, their own, whenever they could, whatever they could to survive. My father was different. He would give his last piece of bread to help a starving, another starving prisoner. He would help a new prisoner that would be brought in, and he would help them get that he could tell wouldn't last long under hard labor conditions. He would help that new prisoner that really didn't know the ropes get an easier job. through his time there. He learned the ins and outs of survival, and eventually he was liberated, and that's what I want to read about now. He was 22 at this point. On the afternoon of April 11th, 1940. Now think about that. From the ages of 16 to 22, in the prime of his young adult life, he was in ghettos and concentration camps. You know, he lost that part of his life. But it just made him stronger, and it made him amazingly gentler, more gentle. On the afternoon of April 11th, 1945, I was resting in my barracks. My body was extremely thin On the afternoon of April 11th, 1945, I was resting in my barracks. My body was extremely weak from the fighting off my foot infection without nourishment or medical attention. I heard something that I couldn't quite believe. I lifted my head to listen. Was it my imagination? Was I losing my mind? I heard singing. The singing became louder and more distinct. The huge barracks stable door now swung open. I finally believed my ears because my eyes saw a sight I shall never forget. I beheld a miracle. Some of the same German SS officers whom he had taken orders from but moments before now marched into our barracks with their hands and bodies bound in rope. Some of my fellow prisoners were pricking them and goading them with the officers' own rifles and bayonets. They shouted to the Nazi officers, "Aren't you proud of your accomplishments?" as they pointed to the half-dead bodies that lay on the wooden shelves in our barracks. Fear replaced German pride and authority. With this wonderful turn of events, we saw German SS officers cringing before Jewish prisoners. They must have asked themselves, what will the future bring for us now? Behind the singing prisoners came the American soldiers. It was unbelievable, but it was true. We had done everything in our power to stay alive long enough to see this miracle come about. Despite so many designed traps to annihilate us, we were finally seeing the miracle happen. We had to keep stiff upper lips and dry eyes through many years of persecution, of being pushed around, of hunger and deprivation, of beyond description, of whippings and psychological torture, of being treated worse than animals. We had learned to shut down our emotions and our pain, to turn off our tears. We had ceased to be human. Now we began to feel again, to react again, to be human again. We had been resurrected, brought back from a life worse than death, and our American heroes were there before our eyes. All I could do was cry and cry and cry. And I was not alone. Prisoners and soldiers cried together. You know, it's hard for me to read these things, even though I've been speaking since a Bad Age Story since 1981. When I read parts of this book, you know, his story, I just can't help but crying myself. And then one final thing that I want to read. None but the imprisoned and the oppressed can fully appreciate the meaning of the word freedom. It is the most precious gift of life. Liberty and freedom are both words that glide easily off the tongue, but freedom arrives through much hardship and pain for those without it. What is freedom? It is incomprehensible. It would take a lifetime to fully express it. And my dad fully expressed it in his lifetime, created a wonderful life for his family, his wife, my mother, Ellie, my brother and sister, Jack and Helen, and me. And they passed very early on in life. Dad died when he was 49 years old of a disease, a lung disease that he probably picked up when he was working in the camps, repairing roofs, and my mother died at 59, and so young, and but if I would love, if nothing else, if I had nothing else, I would love for my parents to be here alive today, to meet our families and our 6 grandchildren and um, and 3 children and my brother and sister's children and grandchildren. I'm just so proud of my father. As a child, all my kids had heroes. All my friends had heroes. And I wondered, why don't I have a hero? And then when I finally read Dad's manuscript, after I had grown and he had passed, and I was married with a little child, with our first child, Jason, and I finally picked up and read his manuscript. And I'd only read sort of parts of it as he was writing it through the years. And I read it from cover to cover, and I knew who my hero was, my dad. Thank you.